Hey everybody, I'm hoping that this is working here. Let me click on this and see. It's probably the worst, okay, and it's working. Probably the worst time of the day to be doing a Facebook Live geared towards parents. I know it's like 5 o'clock here on the East Coast, and most people are getting ready for dinner or running the kids around or whatever, but it's the end of my day here at the clinic, and so I had something on my mind that came up today that I thought it would be maybe helpful to some of you to talk about. So we'll see if we have very many people joining us online here now live, but I'll save it and post it later for you so that other people can watch it. Every day in my work here at the clinic, I'm talking with parents of kids and young adults about all kinds of topics, but psychiatric medication comes up pretty frequently. If you follow my work, you know that I take a pretty significant stance on these kinds of medications, psychiatric drugs. I'm not against them, but I do feel like they're very overused, and I feel like there's a lot of myths and damaging information out there about these medications and what really needs to be done to get to the root of things like depression, anxiety, inattention, those kinds of things. So it was interesting. Today I was talking with a mom and her daughter. I've been seeing them now for a number of weeks. The young lady is a young teenager who has struggled with depression, anxiety, and panic now for quite a number of years, since probably late elementary school. And we've been talking about medication for her because this young woman has been on over 20 medications in the last 4.5 years for the symptoms that she has. And since they started working with me a number of weeks ago, I've worked closely with her prescriber to look at what's really going on with her medications and make some changes to that. But we were talking today in their session about different myths and different things that people think about these kinds of medications. And Mom stopped me at one point and she said to me, why is it that nobody's talking about this stuff? Why didn't anybody tell us any of this information when our child first started on these medications? And it hit home for me because parents say that a lot. And I think there really is a lack of good information out there for parents about what these medications are, and about what the potential risks are, as well as alternatives. So if you followed my work for any length of time, you know that I'm really committed to getting information out there. And it struck me today when Mom said, why isn't anybody talking about this? I thought, Facebook's got these great Facebook Live, options now. I should get on there and just talk to people about these things, and maybe they would find it helpful. So one of the particular myths or issues that I was talking about in that appointment with them today was related to what happens when you start your child on one of these medications. Your child's given a prescription for maybe an antidepressant medication like Prozac or Paxil, or maybe a stimulant medication like Ritalin or Adderall, or something like that. What happens when you're given a prescription like that? You are giving that prescription to your child as you've been instructed to do, and your child's symptoms begin to get worse. Because that can happen, and it does happen with more frequency than I think people realize. And what this mom and I were talking about today is that what very often happens when parents go back into the prescriber's office for the next checkup appointment and they're describing worse symptoms, now my child is seeing me not only depressed but really much more irritable, or their anxiety is really skyrocketed, or their mood wasn't good before but it seems to be a lot worse now. Or something like, my child's mood wasn't good before, but now since starting this medication, she or he seems to be, having thoughts of suicide or hurting other people, or, himself, or something like that. What often happens when parents raise those concerns is they're told something along the lines of, oh, well, your child's symptoms are getting worse. That means we need to increase the dose. We need to add another medication, those kinds of things. And that kind of response represents a real lack of awareness or willingness to acknowledge the fact that these medications can and do make symptoms worse for some people. And, parents often tell me that their complaints or that their concerns about their child's symptoms getting worse on medication are really discounted by the professionals who are prescribing those medications. And like I said, it's most often the case that, well, they're told your child's symptoms are getting worse, we need to add or we need to increase the dose. And it's really important for you to understand that every pharmaceutical company that makes these drugs, whether it's things like, Prozac, Paxil, Lexapro, antipsychotic types of drugs like Abilify, Risperdal, Geodon, Seroquel, or even things like the stimulant medications, Ritalin, Adderall, Concerta, those types of meds. These medications, all of the pharmaceutical companies that make these meds know that some people get worse on these medications. That's why if you open up the package insert that comes with any prescription that you pick up, sometimes it's something that the pharmacist prints off and gives you, or sometimes it's literally a little folded up insert that's inside that package. If you look at that, you will see that the companies are required to list all the possible worsening of symptoms or negative side effects that can happen or that have been known to happen for some people. Now, while those may not be common, meaning the majority of people in the population may not experience those, you need to understand that it's possible that your child may be experiencing those. So if you go in and you say, my child's seems to be kind of depressed or low mood, kind of apathetic, not really motivated, they might receive a diagnosis of depression, which may or may not be accurate, especially in the context of, an 8-minute primary care appointment. But let's say, they get a diagnosis of depression during that appointment, and the physician, recommends a prescription for an antidepressant. If you notice that your child's mood is getting worse after taking that medication, it does not necessarily mean that their symptoms are just getting worse. It can mean that the medication is actually causing those symptoms to worsen. Suicidality is a big one. This has gotten quite a bit of press intermittently over the years, related to, you might have heard of like black box warnings related to some of these antidepressant medications. Those refer to the fact that some people's symptoms get significantly worse very quickly on these medications, to the point where the person now becomes acutely suicidal and they weren't before. And I have seen that happen with children and teens and young adults in my practice. They may have had some symptoms prior to the medication, and then they become acutely depressed and even acutely and suddenly suicidal in a short period of time after being put on the medication, or that can happen over a longer period of time too. So you need to understand that with these medications, while there may be some potential benefit for some people, there are also significant risks that are associated with these drugs for some people. And so I really want you as a parent, or even if, in relation to your child, or even if you're taking these medications yourself, I want you to really be aware that if symptoms are getting worse on these drugs, it doesn't just mean that naturally that's what's happening over the course of the progression of those symptoms for your child. It can mean that they are having a negative response to the medication, and that medication plan needs to be tweaked. You need to be talking with the prescriber about that, and something needs to change with the medication. And it does not necessarily mean that the dose needs to be increased. In fact, if a person is having a negative response, if their symptoms are actually getting worse on the medication, increasing the dose is not going to be the appropriate strategy there. And throwing another medication into the mix is not necessarily the right strategy either. So I want you to be empowered to contact the prescriber, go in for an appointment, contact by the phone. A lot of them now have, online systems where you can send messages. Be really proactive about communicating about that. Let them know exactly what you're seeing since starting the medication. Be really clear that you are concerned that perhaps it may be the medication that's causing some of the problems. And if the prescriber is not willing to engage in a constructive conversation with you about that, if they kind of blow off your concerns, or if they tell you, no, that's not possible, that the medication is causing that, then it's time to find a new prescriber. Because the prescribers who I work with, who are really diligent about trying to meet the needs of patients and trying to make sure that they're not over medicating kids, those prescribers are willing to have this conversation. And actually they're talking with parents about the potential risks and what to watch for before they even put kids on these drugs. So, what's ideal is if you have these conversations with your prescriber before you even start medication. But I understand that very often, unfortunately, that doesn't happen. So if you're noticing problems as a result of or after starting these medications, you need to be proactive. Please be talking to the prescriber. Raise your concern that perhaps it is the medication that is worsening the symptom or causing new problems. And again, if they say that that's not the case or that can't possibly be so, it's time for you to see a new physician or a new prescriber for that, because you really want somebody who's going to listen, who's going to take all of your input into account, who's going to ask your child how they're feeling, and who's really going to put those puzzle pieces together to figure out what's going to be best, especially if there's going to be medication involved, because there can be some real problems and dangers associated with them. And you should always feel like the professionals that you're working with are listening to you and are being diligent about putting the pieces together and really taking your observations and your feedback into account. So just know that if you feel like your child's symptoms are worsening on medication, that's probably not a figment of your imagination. It probably really is happening and very well may be connected to the medication that they're on. So I want you to know that. Again, I think that there's a lot of myths and misunderstanding out there about these kinds of drugs and their use in children and young adults. So, this might be a great forum for me to get on there and just provide this information to you guys and engage in some good discussion about the concerns, the potential risks, and the myths that are out there about psychiatric drugs for kids. So if you have additional questions, put them in the comments. I'll pop back in and answer those. We can have a discussion there. If you have experience to share about this related to yourself or to your child, put those in the comments as well, because I'm hoping to turn this into a resource that parents and professionals can use so that we can all be more educated about these issues and just be more proactive and informed when it comes to these kinds of treatments for kids. So leave your comments there. Hopefully this was helpful, and I'll pop on again later this week and talk about some other myths about psychiatric medication in kids. Have a great rest of your day.